Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm the Dead Cowboy, and this is a bank robbery. Put your fucking hands in the air. Welcome to the meritocracy party. I'm the Dead Cowboy once again, and I'd like to welcome you. Let me just say this. Bad ideas are spreading like diseases and wildfires. The First Amendment is under attack by both the left and the right. So, which stage of genocide is America at? Feel free to leave your opinion about that in the comments. My input on that is we're in stage 3, which is dehumanization. So, quoting from that website I just put on the screen, here we go. Number 3, dehumanization. One group denies the humanity of the other group. Members of it are equated with animals, vermin, insects, or diseases. Dehumanization overcomes the normal human revulsion against murder. At this stage, hate propaganda in print and on hate radios is used to vilify the victim group. In combating this dehumanization, incitement to genocide should not be confused with protected speech. Genocidal societies lack constitutional protection for countervailing speech, and should be treated differently than democracies. Local and international leaders should condemn the use of hate speech and make it culturally unacceptable. Leaders who incite genocide should be banned from international travel and have their foreign finances frozen. Hate radio stations should be shut down and hate propaganda banned. Hate crimes and atrocities should be promptly punished. End quote. As noted in the article, giving free speech to hate groups has historically led to genocide. No one has a right to hate speech in the name of free speech. Hate speech does not support freedom of speech. It leads directly to its demise as it makes way for authoritarian dictators by dehumanizing all other voices and people, without regard for facts or solid logical arguments. Hate speech is full of sophistry, rhetoric, and lies. It ties directly into the abuse of freedom of speech, the same abuse that advertisers use to manipulate the public into buying their products. Welcome to capitalism. Capitalism has failed the human spirit. It's a disgrace. Capitalism is a disgrace to humanity. Meritocracy is the answer. This is a fucking bank heist. Not only that, but hate speech is designed to dehumanize other people. Here's a quote from Frederick Douglass. Quote, "Liberty is meaningless where the right to utter one's thoughts and opinions has ceased to exist. That of all rights is the dread of tyrants. It is the right which they first of all strike down. They know its power. Thrones, dominions, principalities, and powers, founded in injustice and wrong, are sure to tremble if men and women are allowed to reason of righteousness, temperance, and of a judgment to come in their presence." End quote, Frederick Douglass. And now here's another quote about freedom of thought from John Trenchard and Thomas Gordon in their freedom of speech letters. Quote, "Without freedom of thought there can be no such thing as wisdom, and no such thing as public liberty. Without freedom of speech, which is the right of every man and woman as far as by it he does not hurt or control the right of another, and this is the only check it ought to suffer, and the only bounds it ought to know. This sacred privilege is too essential to free governments that the security of property and the freedom of speech always go together. And in those wretched countries where a man cannot call his tongue his own, he can scarce call anything else his own. Whoever would overthrow the liberty of a nation must begin by subduing the freeness of speech, a thing terrible to public traitors." End quote. John Trenchard and Thomas Gordon, Freedom of Speech, that the same is inseparable from public liberty, letter number 15. Not good enough for you. This is a fucking holdup. You better put your hands in the fucking air. Here's a quote from a founding father, Thomas Jefferson. Quote, "Were it left to me to decide whether we should have a government without newspapers or newspapers without a government, I should not hesitate a moment to prefer the latter." End quote, Thomas Jefferson. Here's another quote. "To preserve the freedom of the human mind, then, and freedom of the press, every spirit should be ready to devote itself to martyrdom. For as long as we may think as we will, and speak as we think, the condition of man will proceed in improvement." Thomas Jefferson. Here's another Thomas Jefferson quote. "Our liberty cannot be guarded but by the freedom of the press, nor that be limited without danger of losing it." Another Jefferson quote. "No experiment can be more interesting than that we are now trying, and which we trust will end in establishing the fact that man may be governed by reason and truth. Our first object should therefore be to leave open to him all the avenues to truth. The most effectual hitherto found is the freedom of the press." According to Snopes.com, quote, "No chief executive in modern times has feuded with the press more than President Donald Trump, who has excoriated the mainstream media for feeding the public what he calls fake news and labeled journalists enemies of the people." Here's a quote from another founding father. Quote, "For if men are to be precluded from offering their sentiments on a matter which may involve the most serious and alarming consequences that can invite the consideration of mankind, reason is of no use to us. The freedom of speech may be taken away, and dumb and silent we may be led like sheep to the slaughter." End quote. George Washington. This is a bank heist. Put your fucking hands in the air. Quote, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances." End quote. First Amendment to the United States Constitution. Quote, "Believing with you that religion is a matter which lies solely between man and his God, that he owes account to none other for his faith or his worship, that the legitimate powers of government reach actions only and not opinions, I contemplate with sovereign reverence that act of the whole American people which declared that their legislators should, quote, make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof," end quote, thus building a wall of separation between church and state. Adhering to this expression of the supreme will of the nation in behalf of the rights of conscience, I shall see with sincere satisfaction the progress of those sentiments which tend to restore to man all his natural rights, convinced he has no natural right in opposition to his social duties. End quote. Founding Father Thomas Jefferson. Ever notice how the right-wing parties always want a white male Christian in the White House? Ever notice how they hate protesters exercising the First Amendment? Also odd is how many Muslims have total disregard for the country they live in and would prefer Sharia law to the laws of the country. These are all right-wing people. So was the Nazi Party a right-wing party. In America, right-wingers used to call themselves Democrats, and the left called themselves Republicans. In the last century, these roles were reversed as Democrats and Republicans simply switched names. But make no mistake, today the Republican Party is the right-wing party, and the Democrats are now the left. Republicans have no right to take credit for the actions of the left-wing Republicans of the past. They aren't the same political party. And they definitely do not represent the same ideals. But they love to abuse freedom of speech and will twist history and many other facts to accomplish their agenda through propaganda and even excusing it in the name of free speech. And then these right-wingers will hypocritically refer to the First Amendment when they are called out on their hate speech or on subverting the country with religious ideas, preferences, and religious propaganda. Make no mistake, the First Amendment is under attack and has been for a long time. Peacefully assembled protesters are often attacked by police. So not only is the First Amendment abused by demagogues on the right wing and left wing, but it's also ignored when it comes time for the tyrants to quiet any dissenting voices asking for change and justice. They'll just send out the police to break the First Amendment, to go against the First Amendment, which says we can peaceably assemble to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Sending cops out to dispel the commotion goes completely against the First Amendment. So don't try and cite the First Amendment while you're also trying to shut down protesters, you fucking hypocrites. You're anti-American. As quoted from the Wikipedia page on hate speech, quote, "The law of some countries describes hate speech as speech, gesture, or conduct, writing, or display that incites violence or prejudicial action against a protected group or individual on the basis of their membership of the group, or because it disparages or intimidates a protected group or individual on the basis of their membership of the group. The law may identify a protected group by certain characteristics. In some countries, hate speech is not a legal term. Additionally, in some countries, including the United States, hate speech is protected by the Constitution." The American Constitution needs a complete rehaul. It's not even adhered to as it is, and yet is still open to abuse and manipulation. Thomas Jefferson believes that Americans should revisit the Constitution every 20 years and rewrite it from scratch. His argument was that if Americans weren't vital stakeholders in that foundational document, they would become distanced from governance itself. And the politicians from the president on down would become like wolves. Well, his prophecy came true. We haven't touched the Constitution since they wrote it. And all the politicians are like wolves. The only way an idea can remain free is in the sense of positive liberty. It must take the social contract of Jean-Jacques Rousseau into account. Freedom does not mean the freedom to manipulate each other through lies and deception, but the freedom to assist and educate each other, working together as a team. Freedom does not mean the freedom to spread sophist rhetoric aimed at dividing people through hate, but the freedom to unite ourselves and our differences into a coherent, strong unit. Did we forget the motto, united we stand, divided we fall? Here's the problem. The philosopher Kierkegaard pointed out the problem some years ago when he said, people demand freedom of speech to make up for the freedom of thought which they avoid. So what is social media? It's the channel that allows people to freely express how little freedom of thought they have, how they barely think at all, and just repeat the thoughtless garbage they have been brainwashed to recite by their parents, their peers, their communities. What is the maximum entropy, disorder, that is, possible on Earth? Well, the maximum entropy and disorder is a world of randroid libertarians, the anti-collective, the bestial Freudian id unleashed, the end of civilization, the end of society, the end of progress, a war of all against all. And we're headed there really fast. Where was the slogan America First popularized? Well, it was first popularized in the KKK. Trump is giving them signals that he has their back. If you support this president, you support the KKK. This is a racist and sexist president. Just watch him deal with female representatives of the press when they ask him questions about the Kavanaugh case. Just look at the Kavanaugh case. Ford went under a lie detector test and passed. The people would like to see Kavanaugh go through a lie detector test and pass. Aside from Trump being a KKK supporter, possibly a secret member of the KKK, there are other issues with Trump's America First slogan. Have you ever noticed how self-defeating the Trump's America First mantra is? By adopting this stance, Trump has alienated every other country in the world, and thus ceded America's role as the unofficial leader of the world. No one is going to follow a nation that is nakedly and psychopathically out to serve itself at everyone else's expense. America's foreign policy now reflects the sick, psychopathic mind of Donald Trump himself, the world's #1 narcissist. Hey, he earned that title, so fucking he deserves it. America is utterly marginalized. The rest of the world doesn't even want to deal with us. World leadership is transferring to Europe and China. America has destroyed its own prestige and importance by its selfish, randroid, libertarian attitude. And by randroid, I mean those obsessed with the so-called philosophy of Ayn Rand, who said that selfishness is a virtue. How fucking retarded can you be? See, freedom of speech is under attack. I use the word retarded. Now I'm going to be attacked by a bunch of left-wing liberal snowflakes for using the word retarded. Ayn Rand's philosophy is fucking retarded, okay? And America's made itself a pariah nation because of this fucking retarded philosophy of selfishness is virtue and me first. It's stupid. Trump is running a 101 class in how to achieve the exact opposite of what he dreams of. He wants America to be the global Leviathan. Instead, exactly because of his policies, it will be ignored on the world stage and lose all of its soft power, leaving it to go around the world bullying everyone with hard military power at a massive expense to the American taxpayers and to our eternal shame. Trump will be forgiven nothing at the end of his shambolic reign. He will go down in history as the worst president of them all. A fitting end for such a cretinous Bulgarian clown. How did we get here? How the fuck did we get here, as Michael Moore said? Let's look at the history of the human mind for a moment. Here is a quote on the psychological concept of bicameralism and the history of the human mind. Quote, bicameralism, the condition of being divided into two chambers, is a radical hypothesis in psychology that argues that the human mind once operated in a state in which cognitive functions were divided between one part of the brain, which appears to be speaking, and a second part which listens and obeys, a bicameral mind. The term was coined by Julian Jaynes, who presented the idea in his 1976 book, The Origin of Consciousness, in the breakdown of the bicameral mind, wherein he made the case that a bicameral mentality was the normal and ubiquitous state of the human mind as recently as 3,000 years ago, near the end of the Mediterranean Bronze Age. End quote, Wikipedia. It is possible that bicameral humanity resembled an ant colony. A guiding intelligence taking the role of the queen in an ant colony sent out messages to all the people who carried out their roles, like worker and soldier ants. They had very little initiative or sense of self. A whole tribe in primeval times could have been organized in this way. The people were easily led, docile, submissive, and looking for power figures to provide leadership. So, what's new? The elite rely on this primal mentality that leaves so many people incapable of resisting them. Many people are addicted to being led. It is an addiction that must be overcome if there is to be a society of gods, that is, humanity at its finest, noblest, and best. No one should ever kowtow to another, bend a knee, or kiss a ring. The days of authoritarian societies, of pyramid structures and power hierarchies, are drawing to an end. Do we accept human equality of opportunity, or do we not? It's a very simple question. If we do, then there is no room for any sort of enshrined elite laden with privilege. Everyone on Earth has to be given a proper chance to rise as high as their natural abilities can take them. For that to be possible, the whole panoply of privilege in which our world has been disastrously enmeshed must be abolished. This is a fucking bank heist. There must be an unprecedented redistribution of wealth from the elite, that is the financial elite, to the people. And no one ever again should be allowed to commandeer disproportionate assets. This is the gospel of meritocracy. It's time to shout down the old world. It's time to revalue all values. This is a fucking bank heist. Isaac Asimov, the scientist and genius, said, quote, "There is a cult of ignorance in the United States, and there always has been. The strain of anti-intellectualism has been a constant thread winding its way through our political and cultural life, nurtured by the false notion that democracy means that my ignorance is just as good as your knowledge." End quote, Isaac Asimov. People have an inside and an outside. So does a society. A civilization, a religion, a political system, an economic system, anything that involves people. The meta-historian Arnold Toynbee argued that a civilization is born out of a more primitive society as a response to a serious challenge that cannot be ignored or avoided. The civilization continues to grow by meeting one challenge after another in a continuous cycle of challenge and response. Without challenges, the civilization stagnates and degenerates. If the challenges are too great, the civilization is overcome. If the challenges are too weak, the civilization becomes weak and decadent. There is therefore a golden mean of challenges. They must not be too demanding or too under-demanding. They must not be excessive or deficient. According to Toynbee's theory, a creative minority is the active unit of the civilization that finds the solution to each new challenge. The minority provides the leadership for the civilization through the faculty of mimesis. They inspire the people to copy them and follow their lead. The masses are incapable of discovering the solutions on their own. When the people start imagining they can do better, the civilization is nearly over. At that stage, the creative minority turns into a dominant minority, holding on to power desperately by compulsion. Its creative powers have degenerated. It is no longer the valid leadership of the group. It needs to be replaced. But it refuses to leave the stage. The West is now in exactly this position. We can see the deterioration all around us. The smell of decay and cadavers is everywhere. Toynbee said that the creative minority fail because they become narcissistic, prideful, and entitled, living off the past glories of their creative predecessors, their former self, for which they continue to take credit. They inherit their wealth rather than make it. They separate themselves from the people rather than place themselves in the middle of the people to lead them. They resort to the law to uphold their rights. They have lost all natural authority. They rely on the police to defend them. They become fearful of losing their power and wealth. Their deterioration rapidly increases. They cannot address the next big challenge. In desperation, they seek to create a universal state, to enshrine their power and influence in perpetuity, and to stifle political opposition. There is a palpable malaise in society. Toynbee wrote, quote, "First, the dominant minority attempts to hold by force, against all right and reason, a position of inherited privilege which it has ceased to merit. And then the proletariat repays injustice with resentment, fear with hate, and violence with violence when it executes its acts of secession. Yet the whole movement ends in positive acts of creation, and this on the part of all the actors in the tragedy of disintegration. The dominant minority creates a universal state, the internal proletariat a universal church, and the external proletariat a bevy of barbarian war bands." End quote. Toynbee gave the example of the turbulent last years of the Roman Republic giving way to the authoritarian Roman Empire. At the same time, the people create a universal church to preserve their spiritual values and cultural norms. Toynbee spoke of the dominant minority having two opponents: the internal proletariat within the borders of the state, and an external proletariat outside the frontiers of the state. The internal proletariat is held in subjugation by the dominant minority and grows bitter and resentful. The external proletariat exists outside the civilization in poverty and chaos and grows envious. Economic migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers try to pour in. Terrorism erupts. The external proletariat see the civilization starting to decline and disintegrate and increasingly attack it. The internal proletariat feel increasingly disenfranchised and alienated and despise the external proletariat, whom they find grotesque, frightening, and a threat to their lives, values, and culture. They lose their sense of respect, loyalty, and obligation to the elite minority. They cease to trust them and instead denounce them. We see exactly this process happening in the West today. The internal proletariat set up the universal church almost in opposition to the universal state, as an alternative source of authority. In the Roman Empire, more and more people turned to the Christian religion, the slave religion. They rejected the master religion of the pagan elite. The universal church can survive the demise of the universal state. When the Roman Empire fell, Christianity lived on. Toynbee contended that as a civilization decays, a schism takes place. Society starts to fragment into rival factions. Discord and discontent become rife and endemic. Some people, the conservatives, idealize the past, archaism, while another group, the progressives, idealize the future, futurism. Some people become detached. They remove themselves from the realities of the decaying world and become anomic or fantasists. Some people seek transcendence. They look to some new insight and follow a new religion, as we see with New Ageism. The 21st century has 5 main civilizations: Western civilization, Islam, Hinduism, Russian civilization, and Far Eastern civilization. Africa and South America have failed to create any distinct civilization. The Jews stand as a fossil society. Toynbee wrote, quote, "There remains the case where victims of religious discrimination represent an extinct society which only survives as a fossil. By far the most notable is one of the fossil remnants of the Syriac society, the Jews." End quote, Toynbee. Decay has set in everywhere in the West. It reeks of a rotten carcass. Abandonment, disillusion, and alienation are everywhere. People have lost their self-control. They are self-indulgent and in permanent search of instant gratification. Creativity has vanished. The creative minority is the inside of the civilization. When it fails, the whole civilization fails. It has failed now. The West no longer has an inside. It's soulless and disintegrating at an ever-accelerating rate. What are we going to do about it? This is a fucking bank heist. In closing, the Dead Cowboy would like to quote the great philosopher Plato. So, as Plato said, "There will be no end to the troubles of states or of humanity itself till philosophers become kings in this world, or till those we now call kings and rulers really and truly become philosophers. And political power and philosophy does come into the same hands." End quote. Meritocracy is the answer. I'm the Dead Cowboy. Be sure to subscribe and follow. And thank you for watching. Welcome to the Meritocracy Party. Ad Astra. To the stars.